federal prosecutors trying to prove that a photograph of seashells constituted a death threat against the president reportedly consulted both an artificial intelligence chatbot and a retired mafia hitman for a second opinion. I am Lambert Woollingham, and this is the Daily Shear for Thursday, July 30th. It is the kind of morning where the bond market, the Gulf Coast, and a Senate committee room all managed to generate separate headaches before most people had finished their coffee. Texas spent Wednesday deciding what it will let near a substation, a shoreline, or a squad car, and none of those decisions went quietly. Governor Greg Abbott has told state lawmakers to kill a $3 billion sales tax exemption for data centers and to keep new facilities away from rural neighborhoods, citing power and water demands he now considers unsustainable. Speaking in Fort Worth, he backed rules that would force operators to pay for their own grid connections rather than passing the cost to everyone else. The move builds on a June order asking utility regulators to shield residential ratepayers from the electricity costs tied to the artificial intelligence build-out. Opposition has reached musician Willie Nelson, who issued a statement against a planned facility near his hometown, and Fort Worth City Council is now pushing to form its own task force ahead of a possible moratorium. The scramble is spreading to municipalities across North Texas, all of them suddenly interested in zoning law. Corpus Christi City Council voted 5-4 to reject a $60,000 donation meant to help the city apply for a federal grant toward a proposed $978.8 million seawater desalination plant. The gift would have supported an application for up to $120 million from the United States Bureau of Reclamation to build the Inner Harbor facility, which is designed to turn bay water into drinking water during droughts. 5 council members blocked it, arguing the city should not chase federal funding for a project it has not formally approved, and several cited the donor's anonymity as reason enough to call it dark money. The region's water shortage, once urgent enough to threaten emergency restrictions, has been pushed back to 2028 by recent storms that refilled 2 reservoirs. The billion-dollar plant remains unbuilt and now also unfunded, at least for the moment. The Austin Police Department released body camera footage Wednesday of the July 24th shooting death of 17-year-old Anthoniel Williams, the second, killed by 3 officers after the 911 call reporting an armed teenager turned out to have been placed by Williams himself. The video shows officers telling him to show his hands at a park on Baden Lane, after which he lifted his sweatshirt and extended both arms in a shooting stance. Officers fired after he reached for his waistband. He was carrying a water bottle, not a weapon. Police Chief Lisa Davis has classified the incident as a likely suicide by police. The 3 officers remain on standard administrative leave, and several city council members are demanding a formal review ahead of upcoming budget hearings. San Antonio's Zoning Commission has cleared the way for Tesla to deploy a fleet of autonomous robotaxis within city limits, approving the zoning changes the company needed for its driverless infrastructure. The city becomes the next Texas testing ground after rollouts in Austin and Houston generated their own regulatory friction, and Waymo has separately said it intends to bring its own robotaxis back to the same market, setting up direct competition. Local transit officials and advocates are still raising questions about safety and traffic in a downtown core with no human behind the wheel. The zoning approval removes the last municipal obstacle, leaving the actual launch date up to the company's internal testing and state motor vehicle rules. From city halls to the Federal Reserve, the friction just gets more expensive. The Federal Reserve held its benchmark rate steady at 3.5 to 3.75% on Wednesday even as inflation sits at a 3-year high, driven in part by the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. The 9-3 vote was the first time since 2016 that 3 officials dissented in the same direction, all of them pushing for an immediate quarter-point hike. Chairman Kevin Warsh called the split a healthy debate and admitted the Fed has no magic wand for the cost of living. Within hours, the 30-year Treasury yield jumped 14 basis points to 5.24%, its highest level since 2007, as bond investors made clear they do not share the committee's patience. Oil surged more than 7% on Wednesday after an Iranian missile struck a United States base in Jordan and President Trump vowed heavy retaliation. Brent crude topped $88 a barrel, erasing the calm that had briefly followed ceasefire hopes, and triggered a global equity sell-off that sent the Dow down 1,153 points and the Nasdaq down 1.7%. Investors are pricing in the risk that an expanded war could shut down the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point that handles a fifth of the world's daily oil supply. South Korea's Kospi fell another 1.2%, extending a 2-day slide past 16% as money moved out of semiconductor and AI stocks entirely. The city of Granbury has refused to certify recall petitions against its mayor and several council members over their handling of a 2,000-acre data center and power campus called Project Patriot. Residents turned in more than 5,000 signatures on July 13th, accusing officials of violating the Texas Open Meetings Act and hiding project details, but the city ruled that most signatures lacked dates or listed cities of residence, making them legally unusable. The city secretary also found the underlying allegations too vague to justify a recall under state law. Organisers say they collected more signatures than the officials originally received in votes to get elected, and a legal challenge appears likely. Microsoft reported $90 billion in quarterly revenue, beating expectations on a 27% jump in cloud computing, with its Copilot assistant now past 30 million paid enterprise seats. CEO Satya Nadella confirmed the company is building an AI super app to fold Copilot's chat, coding, and autonomous agent functions into one interface later this year. That growth covered for a rougher story in gaming, where Xbox hardware sales fell 13% and content revenue dropped 10% following studio closures and layoffs. Chief Financial Officer Amy Hood told investors the company will keep spending anyway, projecting roughly $175 billion in infrastructure outlays next year to keep the data centers running. The Federal Communications Commission is finalizing a ban on imported Chinese-made humanoid robots, robotic dogs, and automated vacuum cleaners, which the Trump administration says pose a national security risk. Officials argue the devices could map domestic infrastructure, harvest data, or physically interfere with the power grid, and the rule specifically targets current market leaders in consumer robotics, along with automated floor cleaners built through Chinese supply chains. Units already purchased will be allowed to keep running. Chinese officials have threatened retaliation against American technology firms, adding another front to the industrial standoff over AI hardware. The policy is meant to push robotics manufacturing back onto United States soil, just as logistics and security firms are getting ready to deploy these machines at scale. Overseas, the damage this morning ranges from geological to procedural, sometimes in the same paragraph. Rescue operations in southwestern Japan have shifted toward recovery as the confirmed death toll from Tuesday's magnitude 7.1 earthquake reached 25, with 9 more deaths under review by Kumamoto Prefecture to determine if they are directly tied to the quake. The tremor flattened residential blocks and collapsed a major shopping mall, and crews are still working to reach people believed trapped in the rubble. Nearly 19,000 households remain without power, and more than 9,000 displaced residents are sleeping in cars or crowding into roughly 400 shelters. The Environment Ministry has issued heatstroke alerts as temperatures hit 91 degrees, and Ground Self-Defense Force personnel are distributing rations and water while the local grid stays compromised. Dr. Anthony Fauci invoked his Fifth Amendment right more than 100 times during a Senate Homeland Security Committee hearing on Wednesday, refusing to answer Republican questions about COVID-19's origins and the federal funding of high-risk viral research. In his opening remarks, the 85-year-old former National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases director accused Chairman Rand Paul of an unhinged obsession with prosecuting him. The hearing turned into a partisan fight over the pandemic response, with lawmakers citing his diary entries about becoming a media figure while the disease spread. Fauci received a preemptive pardon from former President Biden, but his legal team advised silence anyway, since that pardon only covers actions taken before it was issued. A Russian cruise missile crossed into Polish airspace overnight during a broad aerial assault on Ukrainian infrastructure, prompting air raid sirens and a scramble of Allied fighter jets. Investigators in Warsaw have not confirmed whether the missile struck Polish soil or turned back toward Ukraine, but the breach marks the war's closest approach yet to NATO territory. The overnight strikes killed at least 8 people across Ukraine, and President Zelensky blamed the casualty on delayed Western air defense deliveries, pressing allies to speed up interceptor shipments. The incursion came hours after the Trump administration agreed to license domestic production of American Patriot missiles inside Ukraine. Howard University has readmitted roughly 200 incoming freshmen days after dropping more than 500 first-year students from its fall roster over unpaid tuition and missing medical records. The purge set off panic among families scrambling for housing or transfer options a month before classes start, and interim President Wayne Frederick defended the sweep, saying the university's mid-July payment deadlines were clearly communicated. After public backlash, administrators began reviewing financial aid files and processing late immunizations to bring some students back. About 300 students remain unenrolled, and the school still maintains the fault lies with families who misunderstood their bills, not with the university's process. Lawyers for former Federal Bureau of Investigation Director James Comey have filed to dismiss his federal case, alleging the Justice Department tracked his phone without a warrant and used artificial intelligence to help build the prosecution. Comey was indicted in April for threatening the president's life over a social media photo of seashells arranged to spell 8647, and the defense says Trump personally pushed investigators for updates on the case. According to the filing, when prosecutors struggled to prove the seashells amounted to a literal threat, they sought interpretive help from ChatGPT and from Sammy the Bull Gravano, a former mafia hitman. The motion accuses the administration of weaponizing the justice system against a former official the president had already fired. Police in Pakistan-administered Kashmir killed at least 30 people after firing on protesters during the first round of local elections. The violence followed a boycott organised by the Joint Awami Action Committee, a civil rights group recently banned under anti-terrorism law, which staged sit-ins across several districts. Live ammunition was used against crowds in Rawalakot and Mirpur, and authorities reported 1 security officer killed and 5 injured in the clashes. The governing PMLN party claimed 9 of 13 contested seats amid accusations of voter suppression, and international rights groups are demanding an independent investigation before the next 2 rounds of voting in August. The FCC's national security case against foreign robotics rests partly on the automated vacuum cleaner, which apparently earned its own line item in the ban alongside humanoid robots and robot dogs. I have to assume it was not profiled for what it does, but for where it goes. Under the couch, behind the media console, into corners nobody in the federal government has thought to sweep since the Ford administration. Units already purchased get to stay, which means the ones already inside American homes are quietly grandfathered into whatever surveillance operation the government suspects them of running. I do not know what a vacuum would even radio back to Beijing beyond a very detailed map of dust, but the policy bans the next one anyway. Mine bumped into the same ottoman 4 times this week, which is either excellent tradecraft or none at all. Corpus Christi's council rejected a $60,000 gift over concerns about undisclosed donors on a project that will eventually ask the federal government for $120 million and taxpayers for the rest of $978.8 million. No gift required. That is the shear for today. I am Lambert Woollingham, still trying to figure out what my vacuum was doing behind the couch for 20 minutes this morning. The day has been shorn until tomorrow.